He said he was quiet that night, the kind of stillness that comes when most people are home winding down after a long day. The sky was deep gray and a light mist hung over the streets. Street lights reflected off the wet pavement, creating a soft glow that followed Daniel's car as he drove. He had just left a charity dinner, the last big event of the year, and the evening had gone better than he could have hoped. He smiled to himself, remembering the applause when the new youth center was announced. His foundation had spent months raising the money, and seeing it all come together made every late night and every meeting worth it. He leaned back in his seat, letting the quiet hum of the engine calm his thoughts. His phone buzzed on the seat beside him. A message from his assistant read, "Congratulations, sir. The board is proud. Rest tonight, you've earned it." Daniel chuckled softly. Rest sounded nice. He had been working nonstop for weeks, traveling, meeting donors, attending events. He hadn't even had a proper meal in 2 days. Just coffee and a few bites here and there. All he wanted was to get home, take off his tie, and sit in peace. As he turned onto a smaller road, the glow of the downtown lights faded behind him. The street was almost empty. It wasn't a bad area, just quiet. A few houses had porch lights on. A cat crossed the road ahead of him. He slowed down, relaxed, and turned on the radio to fill the silence. But then from behind him, a sudden flash of red and blue lights broke through the calm. Daniel glanced in his rearview mirror. A police car was following him, lights spinning. His stomach tightened slightly. He checked his speed, well within the limit. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He sighed, slowed down, and pulled to the side of the road. The police car stopped right behind him, headlights still glaring into his mirror. For a moment, Daniel sat still, hands on the wheel, breathing steadily. He'd been in situations like this before, polite, controlled, cautious. It was late, and he was alone. He told himself it would be fine. The officer approached slowly, flashlight in hand. Daniel could see the beam move across his car, stopping on the back seat where a few folders and envelopes were lying. Paperwork from the charity event. The officer knocked lightly on the window. Daniel rolled it down. The citywide expansion of Daniel's program began faster than anyone expected. Within weeks, community centers were signing up, schools were asking for training sessions, and more police officers volunteered to take part. What had started as one man's painful encounter was now turning into a city movement that people could see and touch. But Daniel wasn't celebrating yet. He knew success wasn't just about numbers. It was about hearts changing, one at a time. One morning, as he sat at his desk reviewing reports, his assistant walked in holding a letter. "This came in the mail for you," she said. He took it and noticed it was handwritten. The return address had no name, only a street number. Curious, he opened it. Inside was a simple note. "I was one of the officers who worked that night when you were stopped. I wasn't the one who pulled you over, but I was there. I remember how you stood there calm, even when you were treated unfairly. I've thought about that moment a lot since then. I just wanted to say thank you for showing respect when you had every reason not to. You made me question how I treat people. You probably don't know who I am, but I wanted you to know I'm trying to be better." Daniel sat still, reading the letter again and again. His chest tightened. He didn't know the writer, but the words carried honesty. It reminded him why he started all this. Not for applause, but for change that happens quietly, deep inside people. Later that day, Daniel met with Officer Reed and Captain Miller at the police headquarters. The chief's office was large but simple, with framed photos of past officers on the wall. The chief leaned back in his chair. "The mayor's office approved your program citywide," he said, "but they're also asking you to take a seat on the advisory board, to work directly with the department." Daniel blinked. "You mean, as part of the police advisory team?" "Yes," the chief said with a small smile. "We want your voice there. You've earned it." For a moment, Daniel didn't know what to say. He had never imagined himself in that position, working from the inside, shaping the way officers approach the community. After the meeting, he walked out into the crisp afternoon air, his thoughts full. He passed by a group of officers talking near the entrance. Some of them waved, others nodded. He noticed how different it felt from before. Respect was growing, and it wasn't forced. That weekend, Daniel attended a ceremony at the youth center. The teenagers from his program were presenting their projects, essays, paintings, and short videos about unity and hope. Parents filled the seats, smiling proudly. When it was Eli's turn to speak, he stood at the front holding a large canvas. It was a new mural design. This one showed a group of people, officers, kids, elders, workers, standing together under a sunrise. Eli spoke softly but clearly. When I first joined this program, I thought it wouldn't work. I thought grown-ups would talk and nothing would change. But I saw people listen to each other. I saw people laugh together. That gave me hope. I learned that even small things can make big differences. The crowd clapped and Daniel felt a lump in his throat. When the ceremony ended, Eli came up to him. "Do you think the world will ever be fair?" the boy asked. Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. "Maybe not perfect," he said, "but fairer, if people keep trying." The following week, Daniel was invited to the city's annual awards dinner. The mayor wanted to honor him publicly for his work. Daniel wasn't sure he wanted the attention, but his assistant convinced him to go. "People need to see the face behind this," she said. The event was held at a large hotel ballroom. The lights were warm, the tables neatly set, and the room filled with city officials, business owners, and reporters. When Daniel's name was called, he walked up to the stage as the mayor handed him a plaque. "For outstanding service to the community," she said. "For showing this city what true leadership looks like." The audience stood and clapped. Daniel looked around. Faces he knew, faces he didn't, all watching. He cleared his throat and spoke into the microphone. "I'm thankful," he began. "But I don't want tonight to be about me. I want it to be about what we can do when we choose patience over anger, listening over shouting, and kindness over judgment." He paused, his eyes finding Officer Reed in the crowd. "A few months ago, I was stopped in this very city. Not as a leader, not as a CEO, just as a man. That night could have made me bitter. Instead, it made me see that sometimes change begins in the most unexpected ways." The room was silent. Some people had tears in their eyes. Daniel continued, his voice gentle but firm. "We can't rewrite history, but we can rewrite how we treat one another. That's the work I want to keep doing. Not through speeches or awards, but through every small act of respect that says, 'I see you, and you matter.'" When he finished, the applause filled the room. But Daniel didn't smile for the cameras. He looked calm, humble, at peace. After the ceremony, as people mingled, a man in a police uniform approached him. "He looked nervous, Mr. Daniel," he said quietly. "I'm not sure if you remember me. I was the officer who stopped you that night." Daniel turned slowly. The man's face was familiar. It took him a moment to place it, but then he remembered. The flashing lights, the tone of voice, the long silence before it was over. "Yes," Daniel said softly. "I remember." The officer shifted uneasily. "I wanted to say I'm sorry. I've thought about that night more times than I can count. I didn't know who you were. That doesn't excuse how I acted, but I was wrong." For a moment, Daniel didn't speak. The room around them faded into a blur. Then he said quietly, "Thank you for saying that. It takes courage to own your mistakes." The officer nodded. "Your program, it changed the way I do my job. I started volunteering last month. It's different now. I just wanted you to know." Daniel smiled faintly. "That means more than you think." The man gave a small nod and walked away. Daniel stood there for a moment, letting the weight of it settle. Forgiveness wasn't easy, but sometimes it was the only thing that made sense. When he finally left the event, the night air was cool and still. He walked to his car, taking his time. He thought about the officer's face, the way he had looked. Not proud, not defensive, just human. As Daniel drove home, the city lights blurred softly through the windshield. He passed by the mural on the side of the community center, the one with the two hands painting together. Under the streetlights, the colors looked almost alive. He parked the car and sat there for a while, just watching. Life had changed so much since that one night. He had gone from being misunderstood to being a bridge between worlds. But deep down, he still felt the same. Just a man trying to do what was right. The next morning, he arrived early at the foundation office. The building was quiet except for the hum of the lights. On his desk was another letter, this one from a high school student. It read, "I used to hate the police. My brother got into trouble and I blamed them. But then I joined your program. I learned that not everyone wearing a badge is bad and not every mistake lasts forever. I want to become a social worker now, to help people like you helped me." Daniel smiled as he folded the letter. He placed it gently in a box he kept in his drawer, a collection of notes and letters from people touched by his work. He never read them for pretty, but as reminders of why he started. As he looked out the window, the city was waking up and cars moving, people walking, life going on. He thought about how fragile change could be, how easily it could slip away if people stopped caring. But he also knew something powerful now. One good action could ripple far beyond what anyone could see. Later that afternoon, he met with a group of college volunteers planning to take the program to nearby towns. As they talked excitedly about their ideas, Daniel simply listened, smiling. He didn't need to lead every step. The work was growing on its own, carried by new voices, new hearts. When the meeting ended, he stood outside and looked at the city skyline. The sun was setting, painting the buildings gold. He felt tired, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that came from purpose. He whispered quietly to himself, "We did something good here, and maybe," he thought that was enough. "Good evening, officer," Daniel said calmly. A few weeks passed, and Daniel's new program was becoming the talk of the town. What started as a small community experiment had now turned into something much bigger. Schools wanted to join, churches offered to host events, and even the city council requested a presentation about how it was helping rebuild trust between people and police. Daniel sat at his office desk one quiet morning, staring at the long list of emails. Most were positive. Thank you notes, invitations, even donations from people he'd never met. But there were also angry ones. Some accused him of trying to make police look good, while others said he was using race to promote himself. He sighed softly. It didn't matter how good your intentions were. There would always be people who didn't understand. His assistant walked in with a stack of papers. "Morning, Daniel." The mayor's office called again. "They'd like you to speak at next week's town hall meeting. They said it's about expanding your project citywide." Daniel nodded slowly. "All right, let's do it." As she left, he leaned back in his chair. He remembered that night clearly. The flashing lights, the misunderstanding, the way everything changed after. It was strange how one painful moment had led to so much growth. Later that afternoon, Daniel met Officer Reed at the youth center to plan the next volunteer project. They were sitting on a bench outside going over notes. "You've really got everyone talking," Reed said with a small smile. "Even officers who never cared about community work are asking to join in." "That's good," Daniel said. "But it's not about the attention. It's about what happens after all the talking is done." Reed nodded. "You're right. Still, I think people are finally starting to see what you were trying to do from the start." Before Daniel could respond, a teenager named Eli walked up, holding a sketchbook. "Hey, Mr. Daniel, I drew something for the next mural." Daniel took the sketchbook. It showed two hands, one wearing a police glove, one bare, painting the same wall together. Above them were the words, "We build together." Daniel smiled warmly. "That's powerful, Eli. I think we'll use it." The boy beamed and ran off. Reed looked at the drawing too. "You know," he said softly, "that's exactly what this is about." The next few days were busy. The town hall was coming up, and Daniel had been asked to present alongside the police chief. It would be a public discussion about trust, responsibility, and how both sides could do better. On the day of the event, Daniel arrived early. The hall was large and full of chatter, reporters setting up cameras, local residents taking their seats. He could feel the tension in the air. Some people came to support him, others to question him. The mayor greeted him at the entrance. "Daniel, I just want to say what you're doing matters. But be ready when some people might challenge you tonight." Daniel nodded calmly. "That's all right. I'm not here to win anyone over. I'm here to tell the truth." When it was time to speak, he walked up to the stage with the police chief beside him. The crowd quieted. He began softly. "A few months ago, I was stopped one night while driving home. It was uncomfortable, it was unfair, but it also opened my eyes. That night could have ended badly. Instead, it started something new." He talked about the program, the volunteers, the youth, the officers who had changed their approach. He told stories of laughter, of teamwork, of how fear had been replaced by familiarity. As he spoke, he noticed some heads nodding, others staying still. Then when he finished, a man stood up from the crowd. His voice was loud. That's all nice talk, but how do we know this isn't just for the cameras? People have been talking about change for years. What makes you any different? The room grew quiet. All eyes turned to Daniel. He took a breath and said, "You're right to ask that. Words aren't enough. That's why we've focused on action. Real people, real time, real results. No cameras, no speeches, just work." The man crossed his arms, still skeptical. "So you think painting walls and shaking hands is going to fix everything?" Daniel didn't flinch. "No," he said simply. "But it's a start. Every bridge begins with one stone." The crowd stayed silent for a moment. Then, slowly, there was a round of applause. Small at first, then growing louder. After the event ended, Daniel stepped outside for some air. It was dark and quiet, the night breeze cool on his face. The police chief joined him. "You handled that well," the chief said. "You didn't get defensive." "That's rare," Daniel smiled faintly. "I've learned that anger doesn't build anything. Listening does," the chief nodded. "I could use more people like you in the department?" Daniel chuckled. "I'm not sure I'd survive the academy." They both laughed, then stood in comfortable silence. In the days that followed, more departments reached out to Daniel's foundation. Some wanted to learn about the program. Others invited him to speak. The attention was growing faster than he expected, but with growth came new challenges. A news outlet published a story questioning whether Daniel was being too friendly with the police. Social media picked it up, and suddenly there were debates, arguments, and endless opinions about him. His assistant showed him the articles one morning. "Do you want to respond to these?" she asked. Daniel shook his head. "No, let them talk. I'm not doing this for headlines." That afternoon, as he walked through the youth center, he noticed Eli sitting alone, looking upset. "What's wrong?" Daniel asked. The boy shrugged. "Some kids online said this program is fake. They said nothing ever changes. They're saying you're wasting your time." Daniel sat beside him. "You know, when I was your age, I used to think change had to be big, loud, fast, and obvious. But now I know it's the small things that last. You can't see a tree grow day by day, but one morning you look up and it's taller." Eli nodded slowly, still thinking. "So you think this is working?" Daniel smiled gently. "I think it's growing. And that's enough for now." A week later, another community event took place, this time in a neighborhood that had seen its share of tension in the past. When Daniel arrived, he noticed the crowd was mixed, some excited, some doubtful. But he also saw familiar faces, Reed, Captain Miller, and a few of the teens from his program. The day went smoothly until during the Q&A session an older man stood up. He pointed at Reed and said loudly, "I remember you. You used to patrol here. You treated us like we didn't belong." The room fell silent. Reed froze. Daniel stepped forward slowly, looking at the man. "Sir," Daniel said gently, "I can see you've been hurt before, and you have every right to feel that way. But we're here now because we want to do better, and all of us. No one can change the past, but we can decide what we build from it." The man stared at Daniel for a moment, then looked at Reed. "You really think people can change?" Reed took a deep breath. "I do," he said quietly. "Because I did." Something in the man's expression softened. He nodded once and sat down. After the event ended, Reed turned to Daniel, his voice low. "Thank you. I didn't know what to say." "You said the truth," Daniel replied. "That's all that matters." That night, Daniel drove home with a heavy but full heart. He thought about everything, and the criticism, the support, the laughter, the tears. Change was messy. It was slow, but it was happening. When he got home, he sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the city lights in the distance. His phone buzzed. A message from the mayor. "Daniel, the council voted tonight. They want to fund your program citywide. Congratulations." He stared at the message, a smile slowly spreading across his face. After a moment, he typed back, "Thank you. Let's make sure it reaches the people who need it most." He set the phone down and leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment. The night was quiet, peaceful. He thought about that first night, the flashing lights, the fear, the misunderstanding. He thought about how different things looked now. Life had a strange way of turning pain into purpose. And as he sat there, feeling the calm breeze, he realized something simple but true. Real change didn't begin in big speeches or city halls. It began in small moments of courage, honesty, and forgiveness. That was the work, and he was ready to keep doing it. The officer didn't smile. "License and registration," he said firmly, the light still in Daniel's face. A week later, Daniel stood in the large conference room at the foundation, sunlight spilling across the long wooden table. His assistant was setting up folders while two board members chatted by the window. The mood was lighter than usual, hopeful even. Daniel looked at the folder in front of him. On it, bold letters read, Community Connection Program. It had started as just an idea, something he mentioned in passing after that difficult encounter with the police. But now it was becoming real. The goal was simple but powerful: to build understanding between officers and the community through honest conversations, workshops, and shared service projects. As the team settled, Daniel began. I know we have a lot of programs already running, but this one feels different. It's not just about funding youth centers or giving scholarships. It's about creating real understanding, the kind that changes hearts, not just headlines. One of the board members nodded. You've struck a nerve with this idea. I've already had calls from schools asking if their students could participate. Another added, and the police department has reached out too. Apparently there's interest in sending officers for volunteer hours. Daniel smiled slightly. That's good news. It's a start. As they discussed logistics, Daniel's phone buzzed quietly on the table. It was a message from Officer Reed. Good morning. I talked to my supervisor about your program. He's interested in hearing more. Could we meet this week? Daniel typed back, absolutely. Let's make it happen. That evening, Daniel sat at his desk reviewing notes for the upcoming meeting. He knew that for this program to work, both sides had to trust each other, and that wouldn't come easily. Years of tension, misunderstandings, and painful stories couldn't be erased with one friendly initiative. But maybe, just maybe, they could begin somewhere. 2 days later, Daniel found himself walking into the local police precinct. The front desk officer gave him a polite but curious glance as he checked in. Here to see Captain Miller, Daniel said. A few minutes later, Officer Reed appeared, smiling slightly. Mr. Daniel, thanks for coming. Please, just Daniel, he said warmly. They walked down a hallway lined with framed photos, awards, community projects, and black and white pictures of officers from years past. Daniel couldn't help noticing how much the faces in those photos had changed over time, though the expressions of pride and duty were the same. In the meeting room, Captain Miller sat waiting, a tall man in his 50s with silver hair and steady eyes. He stood to shake Daniel's hand. Mr. Daniel, I've heard a lot about you. Mostly good things, he said with a chuckle. Daniel smiled. I appreciate that. Thank you for taking the time. They all sat down, and Reed began explaining the concept of the program, bridging the gap between youth and law enforcement through dialogue and cooperation. Captain Miller listened carefully, occasionally nodding. When Reed finished, the captain leaned forward. You know, we've had plenty of workshops before, training sessions, they call them. But they rarely do more than check a box. What you're suggesting sounds personal, real. That's the goal, Daniel said. I don't think change happens in conference rooms. It happens when people sit down and actually talk to each other, about fear, about respect, about what life looks like from both sides. The captain was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You'll have our support. I'll assign a few officers to participate. Start small. Let's see where it goes. Daniel felt a quiet relief. That's all I ask. As they left the precinct, Reed looked at him with a small smile. You handled that perfectly. I think the captain really believes in this. I hope so, Daniel said, because if this works, it could change a lot more than just opinions. The following month was a blur of planning. The first event would take place at one of Daniel's youth centers. An open discussion followed by a volunteer project to paint classrooms and build a new garden space. Daniel wanted everything to feel natural, not forced. He knew some of the young volunteers might feel uneasy around police officers, and some of the officers might feel defensive. But he believed that if people worked side by side, real understanding could start to grow. On the morning of the event, Daniel arrived early. The air was crisp and the smell of fresh paint and soil filled the air. Volunteers were already setting up tables, arranging paint cans, and putting out snacks. By mid-morning, a small group of uniformed officers arrived. Among them, Officer Reed, Some of the younger volunteers looked wary at first, whispering quietly among themselves. Daniel noticed but didn't say anything. He knew this was the moment that mattered most. He gathered everyone in a circle. "Thank you for being here," he began. "Today isn't about uniforms or titles. It's about people. We all care about this community, and the best way to make it stronger is to work together." The group began the project, and slowly, the tension started to ease. Laughter echoed from the paint station as one of the teenagers accidentally splashed paint on an officer's shoe. Instead of getting upset, the officer laughed and said, "Guess that means we're matching now." The kids laughed too, and just like that, the walls began to crumble. During lunch, Daniel sat on the curb with a few volunteers and officers, eating sandwiches and listening to their stories. One young man talked about how nervous he got whenever he saw flashing lights. An officer responded quietly, "You're not the only one who gets nervous. We just show it differently." That simple sentence hit Daniel deeply. For the first time, he could see both sides trying, really trying, to understand each other. Later, when the day was done and the mural on the youth center wall stood bright and beautiful, Daniel felt something shift inside him. It wasn't just about one incident anymore. It was about changing the story for the next generation. A few days after the event, a local newspaper published an article about it. The headline read, "Charity Foundation and Police Team Up to Rebuild Trust." The story included pictures of smiling kids, officers holding paintbrushes, and Daniel standing in the middle, looking proud but humble. The reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Messages poured into the foundation's inbox, people thanking Daniel, asking how they could join and sharing their own experiences. But not everyone was supportive. Some comments online accused Daniel of being too forgiving, saying he was letting the police off too easily. Others questioned the sincerity of the officers. Daniel read the comments quietly one evening at home, sipping tea. He didn't blame people for feeling skeptical. Trust once broken didn't heal overnight. But he also knew that standing still wouldn't help anyone. His phone buzzed again. It was Officer Reed. "Hey, just wanted to say thank you again for letting me be part of that project. It opened my eyes more than I expected." Daniel replied, "You're the one who made the effort. That's what matters." Reed sent another message. "The captain wants to schedule more sessions. Maybe in other neighborhoods too." Daniel smiled faintly. "Tell him I'm in." Over the next few weeks, the program expanded. Each event brought new faces, new conversations, and new understanding. There were awkward moments, of course, times when old wounds resurfaced. But there were also breakthroughs. Officers began mentoring kids interested in public service. Some teenagers even started considering careers in community leadership or law. One evening, after a long day at the youth center, Daniel and Officer Reed sat outside on the steps. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft orange and gold. "You know," Reed said quietly, "when I first met you that night, I thought you were just another angry driver who didn't want to cooperate. I was wrong." Daniel looked at him, his expression calm. "And I thought you were just another officer on a power trip." "I was wrong too." They both laughed softly. Reed leaned back, looking at the sky. "It's strange how one bad night led to all this." "Maybe it wasn't a bad night," Daniel said. "Maybe it was just a start." For a while they sat in silence, listening to the faint sounds of laughter from the kids still playing in the distance. The tension that had once defined their first meeting was long gone, replaced by something quieter: respect. When Daniel finally stood to leave, Reed said, "You've changed a lot of minds in the department, you know. People are talking. They're thinking differently." Daniel smiled. "That's all I ever wanted." As he walked to his car, Daniel thought about how far things had come, from a single roadside stop to something that was actually helping people heal. He didn't fool himself into thinking the world had suddenly changed, but he had learned something important. Sometimes, it only took two people, one willing to admit a mistake, and one willing to forgive, to start rewriting the story. That night, as he drove home, Daniel turned on the radio. A local news host was talking about the new community partnership. "It's nice to see real progress," the host said. "Not just words, but action." Daniel smiled quietly to himself. For the first time in a long while, he felt peace, not because everything was fixed, but because something had begun. Daniel nodded. Of course. May I reach into my jacket? Slowly, the officer replied. Daniel did as told, keeping his movements measured. He handed over his license and registration, his tone polite but steady. Is there a problem? Just routine, the officer said, glancing at the ID. His eyes flicked between the license and Daniel's face. Where are you headed tonight? Home, Daniel said simply. I was at a charity event downtown. The officer frowned slightly as if that answer didn't quite sit right. At this hour? It was a fundraiser dinner, Daniel said, still calm. It ran late. The officer looked over his shoulder toward the back seat again, where the envelope sat. What's in the papers? Donations, Daniel explained. Receipts, checks, things from the event. The next morning, sunlight peeked through the curtains of Daniel's room, waking him from a light, restless sleep. He stretched, rubbed his eyes, and tried to shake off the fog of last night. He had gone to bed late, but his mind had been too full to rest properly. The memory of the flashing lights still lingered. The glare of the officer's flashlight, the questions, the suspicion. He kept replaying it, wondering if there was something he could have said differently or if it even mattered. Deep down, he knew it didn't. Some people saw what they wanted to see. Daniel walked downstairs to the kitchen, brewed a cup of coffee, and sat at the table where the envelopes from the charity dinner still lay. The sight of them brought back a sense of purpose. It reminded him that for every uncomfortable moment he faced, there were hundreds of people depending on his strength. Young people who looked up to him, who needed to see someone like them making a difference. He checked his phone and saw a few unread messages. His assistant had sent a list of follow-up tasks, thank you notes to donors, scheduling a meeting with the board, preparing a media release about the new youth center. He sighed softly. Work never stopped. But that was okay. He liked keeping busy. It kept his mind focused on what mattered. He got dressed in a simple button-down shirt and blazer, no tie today, and headed to the office. His foundation's building was small but lively, with colorful murals painted by local kids on the walls and a bright open lobby that always smelled faintly of fresh coffee and paper. As soon as he walked in, the receptionist smiled warmly. Good morning, sir. You were amazing last night. Everyone's still talking about the event. Daniel smiled back. Glad to hear it. How's everything this morning? Busy as always, she said with a laugh. We've already had 3 calls asking about the new youth center. That's a good problem to have, Daniel said. Nodding approvingly, he walked to his office, a modest but cozy space filled with photos, files, and a large corkboard full of notes and plans. He had just started reviewing some paperwork when there was a soft knock at his door. Come in, he said. His assistant stepped inside, holding a tablet. Morning. I have the press summary from last night. The local news ran a short segment on the fundraiser. They loved your speech. That's good news, Daniel said with a smile. Let's send them a thank you message. The assistant nodded but hesitated before leaving. By the way, are you all right? You seem a little off today. Daniel looked up, surprised. I'm fine. Just didn't sleep much. She nodded slowly, understanding there was more to it but not wanting to push. All right. If you need anything, I'm around. When she left, Daniel leaned back in his chair. He appreciated her concern, but he didn't want to talk about it. Not yet. What happened last night wasn't new to him, but somehow this time it hit differently, maybe because he'd worked so hard to build something good, to be seen for his work and not his skin. He took another sip of coffee, trying to shake the thoughts away when his phone buzzed again. A message popped up from a number he didn't recognize. Good morning, Mr. Daniel. I'm Officer Reed from the City Police Department. I'd like to apologize for last night. If you're available, I'd appreciate the chance to speak with you briefly. Daniel stared at the message for a few seconds. He hadn't expected that. It wasn't common for officers to reach out after an incident like that. He typed slowly. Thank you for your message. I'm at my office downtown if you'd like to stop by. He didn't know what to expect, but he believed in giving people the chance to make things right. About an hour later, the receptionist buzzed his office. Sir, there's a police officer here to see you. Send him in, Daniel said calmly. The door opened, and the same officer from the night before stepped in, dressed neatly in uniform. His expression was serious but respectful. Mr. Daniel, he said, nodding slightly, I appreciate you taking the time to meet. Daniel stood and gestured to the seat across from his desk. Of course. Have a seat. The officer sat down, resting his cap on his knee. For a moment, there was silence. Then he said, I owe you an apology. I reviewed your information this morning and realized who you are. And more importantly, what you do for this community. Daniel's face stayed calm. You don't need to apologize for not knowing who I am. That's not the issue. The officer looked down, his jaw tightening. You're right, he said quietly. The issue is that I treated you with suspicion when there was no reason to. I've been thinking about it all morning. I let my assumptions lead, and that's not the kind of officer I want to be. Daniel nodded slowly. He appreciated the honesty. It takes courage to admit that, he said. Most people wouldn't. The officer looked up. To be honest, sir, when I pulled you over, I thought I was just following protocol. But afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about the look on your face. Calm, polite, but disappointed. It made me realize how easy it is for me to forget the weight that moment carries for someone else. Daniel leaned forward slightly. I don't hate the police, Officer Reed. In fact, my foundation works with a few retired officers who help mentor kids. But moments like last night, they stay with people. They create walls that take years to break down. Reed nodded slowly, absorbing his words. You're right, he said quietly. And I want to do better. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to at least face you and say I was wrong. Daniel smiled gently. That means more than you realize. Maybe next time when you stop someone, you'll see a person first, not a profile. The officer nodded, stood, and offered his hand. Thank you for your time, sir. And again, I'm sorry. Daniel shook his hand firmly. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after. When the officer left, Daniel sat back and exhaled deeply. It felt like a small step, but a meaningful one. Maybe this encounter could lead to something better. That afternoon, he shared the story privately with his board members, not to shame the officer, but to highlight how deeply such moments affect people and how conversations could lead to change. One of the board members, a retired school principal, listened thoughtfully. You know, she said, what happened could open a bigger conversation. Maybe your foundation could start a community program, one that brings officers and young people together. Daniel's eyes brightened slightly. That's a good idea, he said. A bridge, not a barrier. They spent the next few days sketching out ideas, workshops, mentorship events, community dialogues. The concept was simple, understanding through real connection. A few days later, Daniel got another message from Officer Reed. I've been thinking about what you said, the message read. If you ever start that program, I'd like to help. Daniel smiled when he saw it. Sometimes change started small. One conversation, one moment of understanding. Later that week, he attended another event, a volunteer gathering at one of the youth centers. The kids were full of energy, laughing and painting murals on the walls. Daniel walked among them, offering encouragement and smiles. One young man, maybe 17, came up to him. Hey, I saw you on the news, he said shyly. They said you're the guy who helps build these places. Daniel chuckled. That's me, but I didn't do it alone. It's teamwork, the boy nodded. I want to do what you do someday and help people. Daniel looked at him warmly. You already are by being here. The boy grinned. You think so? I know so, Daniel said. As he looked around the center, the kids painting, the volunteers chatting, the bright colors spreading across the walls, Daniel felt something lift in his chest. The world still had its flaws, but it also had moments like this, filled with hope and heart. That night, as he locked up the office and stepped into the cool air, Daniel thought again about how one encounter had changed more than just his night. It had started something, a chain of understanding, a ripple of awareness that could grow into something meaningful. He looked up at the quiet city skyline, lights twinkling like distant stars. Sometimes, he thought, progress didn't come from big speeches or headlines. It came from small, honest moments, when people faced their own mistakes and decided to do better. He walked to his car, opened the door, and paused for a moment, glancing at his reflection in the window. He smiled faintly, not out of pride but out of peace. He whispered softly, one day at a time. Then he got in, started the engine, and drove off into the night, this time without any flashing lights in his mirror. Just the quiet hum of the road and the comforting thought that change, however slow, was possible. The officer nodded but didn't seem satisfied. Mind if I take a look? Daniel's fingers tightened slightly on the steering wheel. He wanted to say no, that he had no reason to agree, but it was late, and he didn't want this to turn into something bigger. If it'll help, he said quietly. Go ahead. The officer stepped back, shining the flashlight inside. Daniel watched as the beam moved across the car. His shoulders stayed relaxed, but inside a quiet frustration built. He knew exactly what this was, and he'd seen the look before. The officer wasn't stopping him because of a traffic violation. He was stopping him because Daniel didn't look like someone who belonged in a sleek black car at night. Still, he said nothing. The officer finally stepped back and handed Daniel's documents through the window. Sit tight, he said before walking back to his car. Daniel sighed, resting his head against the seat. He could see the silhouette of the officer in the patrol car, probably running his plates, checking his name. It would take a minute or two. He thought of his staff, of the teenagers, though. A foundation helped. The kids who came from tough neighborhoods but had big dreams. He'd told them so many times to stay calm, to handle things with dignity even when life felt unfair. Now he had to take his own advice. After a few minutes, the officer returned. You said you're coming from a charity? He asked. Yes, Daniel said. I run a non-profit organization. We raise funds for youth programs. The officer tilted his head. A non-profit, huh? You drive a nice car for that. Daniel smiled faintly, though his patience was thinning. It's a company car, he said. Donated by a partner organization. The officer looked unconvinced. You mind stepping out for a second? Daniel hesitated. He wanted to ask why, but he knew the safest thing was to cooperate. He unbuckled his seatbelt, opened the door slowly, and stepped into the cool night air. The mist had turned into a light drizzle. The road was silent except for the faint hum of passing cars in the distance. The officer circled the vehicle, shining his light again on the back seat. So what's in those envelopes again? Checks, Daniel repeated calmly. From tonight's event, the officer nodded slowly. Mind showing me one? Daniel reached in carefully and picked up an envelope, handing it over. Inside were a few donation slips and handwritten notes from supporters. The officer scanned them with a puzzled look. Big numbers here, he said. What kind of charity is this? Community development, Daniel replied. We build youth centers, fund scholarships, and provide job training programs. For a second, the officer said nothing. Then he handed the envelope back. All right, he muttered. Daniel took a slow breath. Officer, he said gently, can I ask what made you stop me tonight? The officer hesitated. You matched the description of a vehicle reported earlier, he said vaguely. Daniel nodded slowly. He knew that line. It was the standard one. I understand, he said softly. I hope whoever you're looking for is safe. There was a pause. Something in Daniel's calm tone seemed to catch the officer off guard. After a moment, the officer cleared his throat. You can go. Drive safe. Daniel nodded, stepped back into his car, and shut the door quietly. He sat there for a few seconds, just breathing. The tension in his chest slowly loosened. As he started the engine, he caught his own reflection in the rearview mirror. His eyes looked tired, and not just from the long day, but from years of moments like this. Moments where he had to prove over and over that he belonged. He drove off slowly, the police car disappearing behind him. The drizzle turned into a soft rain, tapping gently on the windshield. By the time he reached home, the city lights had faded. His house sat at the end of a quiet street, surrounded by tall trees. He parked, turned off the engine, and sat in silence for a moment before stepping out. The air smelled of rain and earth. Inside, he loosened his tie and placed the donation envelopes on the kitchen table. He poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, letting the events of the night replay in his mind. It wasn't anger he felt. Not exactly. It was more like exhaustion. He had spent his whole life working hard, building a name based on integrity and compassion, and still, moments like this reminded him how fragile that respect could be. He walked to his living room and looked at the framed photos on the wall, pictures of smiling kids at the youth centers, volunteers painting buildings, a group of students holding scholarships. Those faces gave him strength. He whispered quietly to himself, You can't change everyone's mind in a day, but you can keep showing them who you are. He turned off the lights and headed upstairs, the sound of the rain still falling outside. As he lay in bed, He thought about the officer. He wondered if the man knew who he had stopped, if he'd ever learn the truth. Not out of pride, but out of hope. Maybe if he did, he'd think twice next time before judging someone too quickly. Daniel closed his eyes and breathed deeply. Tomorrow would be another day, another chance to keep building something better, not just for himself, but for everyone who still faced the same quiet battles. Outside, the rain began to ease. The night slowly gave way to calm, and the city lights glowed faintly in the distance. And though Daniel didn't know it yet, this small encounter, this brief tense stop on a quiet street, was about to start something bigger than he could imagine.